Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. One of the aspects of the continuing resolution brouhaha that has people losing confidence in House Speaker Johnson, myself included, I'm sorry to say, particularly the first iteration that was negotiated by the firm, as Senator Mike Lee calls it, the legislative leaders, and then dumped onto their respective caucuses to vote up or down and before you have a chance to page through $1,500 of pork-laden spending. By the way, you know how Vivek Ramaswamy read that so fast and was able to identify, the two Bobs, but Vivek specifically? They used AI. They used AI to read the thing and, look for keywords, and then you can figure out some of the most egregious examples of what Congress wants to use other people's money for. But one of the things in the original, which just speaks to a caucus that's not ready for reform, Chicago's a city not ready for reform. The House GOP seems to be a caucus not ready for reform. That's a problem. The Global Engagement Center within the State Department. This is a propaganda arm of the censorship industrial complex. It was headed back at its inception by a man named Richard Stengel, who was a former editor for Time magazine. This is Richard Stengel talking about propaganda, government-sponsored propaganda at, where else? Council for Foreign Relations, Confab.
There's another word for master narratives. It's called history. Basically, every country creates their own narrative story. And my old job at the State Department was what people used to joke as the chief propagandist job. We haven't talked about propaganda. Propaganda, I'm not against propaganda. Every country does it, and they have to do it to their own population. And I don't necessarily think it's that awful. And this idea of a news cartel, I mean, I was editor of Time in 2012 during that election, and I remember, you're competing against cartels and everybody. I remember being on a panel with the then editor of the New York Times, who said, it's really hard to break through these days. This is the editor of the New York Times saying it's hard to break through. I wanted to jump off the platform. Like, what's it like for the rest of everybody? So, I mean, there are cartels, but cartels don't have hegemony like they used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Richard Stengel subsequently wrote a op-ed in the Amazon Post calling for a rethinking of the First Amendment. Sure, of course. That's what you do when you're running a censorship industrial complex, part of the cartel. Mike Benz was on Joe Rogan's show. Our friend Mike Benz, he's made big time. Mike Benz on Joe Rogan talking about the Global Engagement Center, which we've talked to him about on this program as well.
He used to be a free speech maximalist back when he was in the media, and media companies benefited from that. But when Trump won the election in 2016, he became convinced that actually the First Amendment was a mistake. He actually openly advocated in the Washington Post in an op-ed that we effectively end the First Amendment, that we copycat Europe's laws. And then he wrote a whole book on it. This is the guy who started effectively the country's first censorship center. But then they did a really cute trick. They went from counterterrorism to counterpopulism. And so in 2016, the Global Engagement Center pivoted from being counterterrorism to counterpopulism, arguing that right-wing populist governments, it wasn't just right-wing, they were also against left-wing populists, but they simply never rose to power in the way that Trump did in the U.S., Bolsonaro did in Brazil, Matteo Salvini did in Italy, Marine Le Pen almost did in France. Nigel Farage was on his way to in the UK and the Brexit referendum, the AfD party in Germany, the Vox party in Spain. In 2016, they were afraid that social media, rising all of these right-wing populist parties to power, would effectively collapse the entire rules-based international order unless there was international censorship, because Brexit would give rise to Frexit if Marine Le Pen won, and she was massively overpowered on social media versus Macron. If as I mentioned, Italy, Germany. There was going to be not just Brexit. There's going to be Frexit, Spexit, Italexit, Grexit, Gorexit. So the entire EU would come undone, which would mean all of NATO would come undone, which would mean there's no enforcement arm for the IMF or the World Bank or international creditors, which would mean it would be like the ending scene of Fight Club, where the credit card company buildings all collapse just because you're allowed to post on the internet. And they talked about that quite openly in 2017 as they were creating this whole censorship infrastructure.
And House Republicans want to fund that? Want to maintain funding of that? I sort of maybe some simple rules for a complex world, to borrow from the our great friend and law professor Richard Epstein. Don't fund your enemies. Don't fund America's enemies, both foreign and domestic. And the censorship industrial complex is an internal enemy in this country. Unfortunately, people who were, as Mike Benn said, when he was Time Magazine editor, he was a free speech maximalist. Then he became the head of the censorship industrial complex, the Global Engagement Center, the State Department, and Richard Stengel all of a sudden is saying, let's scrap the First Amendment in pertinent part. That's an enemy of a free people. We fund the Taliban, and Tony Blinken doesn't seem too bothered about that. We're funding both sides of just about every conflict in the Middle East and Eastern Europe in one way or the other. And then we fund organizations that are stood up within our government to censor and otherwise purposely misinform Americans. Well, what kind of sense does that make? And how do you not raise the specter on this? Why does it take Mike Benz to do that? Where's the intellectual leadership you would expect from somebody who is an intellectual like Mike Johnson? For more on this, please be joined by Steve Moore, economist, author of The Trump Economic Miracle and the Plan to Unleash Prosperity Again, co-authored with Art Laffer. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, Dan. By the way, you had me at Global Engagement Center. That's all I had to hear.
Yeah, exactly.
It's GEC, Stephen Moore, didn't you know?
Yeah, it does. It's sort of, something that Aldous Huxley would have dreamed up. Yes, I know.
But let me just say this, these are the things, when we're running a $2 trillion deficit, when we're having this big argument about the budget now, these are things that just have to be axed. And by the way, that probably, I don't know what the budget for this program is, maybe $50 million, but
doesn't matter.
I don't know, maybe more. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's just, why are we wasting money on these kinds of things when the country has gone bankrupt? And we could sit here and talk about 100 programs like that are in the State Department, that are in the, what's happened with Voice of America, all these things. The Voice of America used to be pro-America. It isn't anymore. So a lot of work to be done. But I'll tell you, I know Russ Vought very well. Russ Vought, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is the incoming budget director for Trump. Mm-hmm. He knows about this stuff. If Congress will allow us to do it, we're going to take an axe to these things, and they're gone.
Well, is Speaker Johnson staying or going? Because Senators Mike Lee and Rand Paul, and there's more rumblings than just from them about Speaker Johnson's future as Speaker.
I like Speaker Johnson, actually. I think he's been a quite effective Speaker under the circumstances. By the way, I do like the idea. Have you been hearing about this idea of Elon Musk?
Oh, yeah,
exactly
we
what I'm
talked
talking
about.
Yeah, right. That's an amazing. I never thought of that, because then I had forgotten that you don't have to be a member of the House of Representatives to be the Speaker. But I think Johnson has done a really good job, given that's an almost impossible job. You've got 435 cats all running all over the place. It was Newt Gingrich said being the Speaker of the House is like trying to herd cats, and that's not an easy thing to do. And only out of those 435, only about 220 of them are Republicans. They have about a 3 or 4 seat majority. It's really tough to get a majority to do anything in that Congress. And so I think it's unfair to blame him for this mess. I think it has to be laid at the feet of Joe Biden, who has ruined our finances for the last 4 years. And this is a disgrace what's happening. Did you see yesterday he approved a $15 billion loan to beat PG&E, which is the largest utility company
in California. Mm-hmm.
You know why? Because it's going bankrupt. You know why? They're running out of extra electricity in California because they have the Green New Deal there. And so now people in Chicago and people in Philadelphia and people in New York and people in Charlotte have to pay for the mistakes California has made. I mean, we are spending money like candy, folks, in Washington, like they're M&Ms. And it has got to stop. And unfortunately, this kind of current budget, I just say get the damn thing done. I know there's a lot of waste and efficiency. Let Trump get in and start over again, because the last 4 years have been a fiscal disaster. $7 trillion added to the debt in 4 years. Congratulations. Do you guys remember? By the way, it was only a year and a half ago when Joe Biden said, I cut the deficit more than any other president.
Right. Some more beautiful lies. Well, what about Biden this morning pardoning or debt forgiveness for 55,000 more student loans?
I had not heard that. Yeah. Oh my God! I mean, can I get debt forgiveness on my mortgage?
I'd like that too. What about credit cards? I mean, don't stop with student loans.
Well, I know we laugh about this, but this is the mentality. But look, that is all going to change abruptly in about 30 days. And so folks, just hang in there, because this absurdity, like what is it called again? The Global Engagement Center.
Yeah, right.
Stuff is going to go away.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the problem I have with Mike Johnson, who I like too and am inclined to be supportive of, but he's making it difficult, is instead of using his platform to make arguments, instead of breaking from the tradition of the four legislative leaders in closed doors horse trading and then coming out with a monstrosity for their caucuses to up or down vote in 5 minutes. He could be making the argument about these sorts of things that need to go. He could be making the argument about Biden policies that have put us in this position like you're describing. And instead, he's making an argument about how small farmers need $10 billion in aid because they've been impacted by inflation and droughts. And that's nonsense.
Okay, you got me. I
Yeah.
I can't argue with that.
Okay.
There's an incredible. I mean, when you do that AI thing for going through that bill that you were talking about, just I wonder if they word pork or bacon.
Yeah, right.
I mean, because there's so much crap in that bill. The football stadium, I'm sure it is a national priority. We're losing $2 trillion, but the United States federal government has to fund the football stadium. That's a high priority.
It's the kind of thing you'd expect Illinois to do. Actually, the Chicago Bears are trying to get that done.
Trying to do it.
Yeah. So, speaking of the Doge boys, since they're so central to this larger conversation, how is your interviewing going to be the executive director of Doge?
Oh, God. Well, those guys are off to a booming start. I've talked a bit with Vivek just about what he's doing, and it is amazing, and they're everywhere. And the hope that I have is they just change the whole culture, the culture of spending and the culture of every time there's a problem in America, we have a federal program to try to stop it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the best contribution. Expose to the American people the incredible waste that's going on. The fact that, they've made hay out of, and this is something we've talked about on this show for the last 9 months about how only 10% of federal employees are going up for work 40 hours a week, which, by the way, I was thinking about this in the context of, oh, my God, oh, no, we can't have a government shutdown of non-essential employees. I mean, my God, they won't be able to go to work. They're not going to work already. How's that going to be different than what's happening today?
But then the big question, of course, is, these one-off programs that are patently absurd and easy to cut, at least intellectually. But the problem is, if you're going to be intellectually honest, 72% of federal spending is non-discretionary or debt service. So you can't really cut $2 trillion out of the federal budget like Elon Musk suggests you can if you don't structurally change the way that entitlement programs are set up. And what do you think the appetite for that is?
Well, Social Security is a system we have to. I've been advocating this for 35 years. Starting tomorrow, every young person in America, anyone listening to the show under the age of 40, puts 10% of their paycheck into a 401k plan, not sending it into the black hole of Social Security. And if you do that, folks, you'll get a 2 to 3 times higher for the young people. Your benefit that you get when you retire will be 2 to 3 times higher because they spend your Social Security money on everything else but Social Security. So That we should have done this. If we had done this, 35 years ago, my benefit, because I'm 64, guys. Next year I will be eligible.
Wow.
I will be eligible for Social Security and Medicare. By the way, that's part of the problem, right? I mean,
now we got to pay for your Medicare now. Good grief! I mean, the bills keep coming.
Thank you very much, folks. But look, it is true. Trump says I'm not going to cut Social Security benefits and I'm not going to cut Medicare. Frankly, I don't think we should. But that's not to say you cannot save money. There are hundreds of billions of dollars of fraudulent payments in these programs. There's so much waste and duplication. You could go and cut, $200 billion out of these programs easily, and it would not affect people's basic medical care benefits. So that's what DOGE is going to do, is find the areas where we could save the money without, did you know, remember all those COVID programs like the PPP, and we spent and the unemployment insurance and the food stamps and all that.
Yeah.
We know there's something called the U.S. Government Accountability Office. This is an agency of government that is like an auditing agency, and they found that in the last 4 years there has been $300 billion of fraudulent payments in these programs. And by the way, Amy, a lot of the people who got the fraudulent payments don't even live in the United States.
Oh, I know. People in prisons got
Russians and Ukrainians and people in Syria and stuff that figured out how to hack the system. That's outrageous.
Well, I mean, but we got to keep that. We got the H5N1 avian flu thing going on, so we got to shut down the economy and restart those programs.
Well, did you also hear who was our guy who Anthony Fauci made an announcement yesterday that because of these drones, are you following that drone story?
Sure,
I am. And aliens.
A lot about that. Because of that, we're going to all have to wear masks.
No.
I'm kidding.
Don't give me a heart attack.
Stephen Moore, economist, author of the Trump Economic Mural and the Plan to Unleash Prosperity again. That is co-authored with Art Laffer.
Yeah.
Steve, thanks as always. Merry Christmas.
Okay. Merry Christmas, guys. I'm coming to Chicago tomorrow. Wait a minute. Tomorrow, 24 degrees?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tonight it's going to be 14. 24.
Maybe I better go to Honolulu instead.
That's a better idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Have
right.
a good one, guys.
You too.
Bye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
We all hear the radio ads about the IRS. They tell you to be afraid, to be scared, and they try to frighten you into calling. I'm not here to do that. Tax